This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Landslides kill at least 13 people in Cameroon. Researchers say origin of man may be in Botswana and not East Africa. And British Parliament votes on December the 12th election after opposition Labour Party voices its support. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Karen Roberts, live in Nairobi. Butcher joins me now with all your business news.
Thank you, Karen. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Unemployment rates in South Africa rise to the highest levels. And Kenya announces plans to cut its commercial borrowing. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Butcher. Well, let's begin in Cameroon, where at least 13 people died overnight in the western village of Bamungum, near to the regional capital Bafoussam, after heavy rainfall caused floods that led to a landslide. Authorities say 20 houses were destroyed. About a dozen other people suffered severe wounds following the incident. It's estimated that at least 120 people live in the neighborhood that was struck by the floods. Search efforts are continuing around the area of the houses, and the government has released funds to support the rescue and recovery operation. In Burkina Faso, the death toll from the Monday attack in Pobé-Mangao has risen to 19. It's emerging that the attackers also burned down houses and shops before escaping on stolen motorbikes. The 19 people were killed after refusing to cooperate with militants who had demanded their assistance to acquire arms. Joining us live from Lagos now is CGTN's Deji Badmus. Deji, tell us more about this attack.
Well, thank you very much. Well, this is one attack too many for Burkina Faso. In just this month alone, the country has suffered 3 deadly attacks from suspected jihadis in its northern region. On the 4th of October, at least 20 people were killed in an attack at the Dolmane gold mining site in Som province in the country's north. 8 days later, another attack took place in another northern village, that's Salmosi. Now, suspected jihadis stormed a mosque there, killing 16 people. So the country was still coming to terms with those attacks when this latest one happened over the weekend in yet another northern village, which has now claimed 19 lives. Now, like the previous attacks, no group has actually claimed responsibility for this one, but the government has blamed it on jihadis who usually cross over from neighboring Mali to carry out attacks in remote border communities of Burkina Faso. The government is obviously struggling to deal with the spate of attacks. The Burkina Faso military is not well equipped to deal with the situation, and regional efforts actually to tackle growing terrorist activities in the Sahel region as a whole has actually been hampered by funding. Regional leaders have now pledged a $1 billion funding now to efforts to address the problem. For now, the Burkina Faso government has sent in military reinforcement to the area where this latest attack occurred, but there are no guarantees that the jihadists will not strike again.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was Deji Badmus for us in Lagos on the attack in Burkina Faso. Moving on to other news now, a group of researchers say that they have pinpointed the ancestral homeland of all human beings, and it's in modern-day Botswana. A new study published in the journal Nature reports that scientists analysed mitochondrial DNA, that's genetic information that gets passed down the female line, from more than 1,200 people across populations in Africa. CGTN's Robert Nagila has more on that story.
It has always been widely accepted that modern humans, Homo sapiens, came from the African continent. What experts have been uncertain about is where in Africa they originated from until now. A new study claims to have the answer and suggests modern humans' ancestral homeland was in modern-day Botswana, just south of the Zambezi River. According to research published in the journal Nature by geneticist Vanessa Hayes of the Govan Institute of Medical Research and University of Sydney, scientists analyzed mitochondrial DNA, genetic information that gets passed down the female line from over 1,200 people across populations in southern Africa. By pulling on that genetic string, researchers say every person alive today descended from a woman who lived in modern-day Botswana about 200,000 years ago. The team's analysis claims that Homo sapiens lived here for about 70,000 years. But as the climate changed, a group spread northeast 130,000 years ago, while a second migration went southwest 110,000 years ago. The timeline, however, contradicts one some scientists have created based on fossil evidence. The oldest ever specimens of anatomically modern humans, skulls and other fossils dating back 195,000 years ago were found in Ethiopia, leading many experts to point to Eastern Africa as the birthplace of our modern ancestors. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
A team of Kenyan researchers is working to develop snake anti-venom to save lives. Well, CGTN reporter Wilkista Nyabwa is here with me. Thank you very much for joining us. What is the significance of this for Kenyans?
Thank you, Karen. Well, this is very significant. It is an important issue because in studies show that in a year, about 70,000 East Africans do suffer snake bites. And this is a major issue also because antivenom is very difficult to come by. And this means that some of them do lose their lives. And this is the reason why the Kenya Snakebite Research Institute is working on an antivenom that would be available in the market in about 5 years. This basically could save thousands of lives if it is in the market within the stipulated time. Let's take a look at a report giving us further insights on that issue. Alvian Dunge is trying to calm her little boy down. He lost his finger to a snake bite, and even after doctors saved his life by amputating his poisoned finger, the baby boy is in considerable pain.
The finger was left swollen and very black. It was so black and started to rot. It had a bad smell, and the doctor suggested that the finger should be amputated so that it does not affect the whole hand. This was after a week since the snake bite.
Snake bites are quite common in Kenya's Kitui County. The area's semi-arid climate makes it a favorable home to snakes. About 700 Kenyans die because of snake bites each year.
The snake problem still persists because my brother was bitten by a snake. My brother-in-law and also our uncle was bitten by a snake. And now my child has been bitten by a snake. There are very many snakes around. When you're walking, you meet a big snake and you have to hide and wait for the snake to pass. Then you can proceed with your journey.
The Kenya Snakebite Research and Intervention Center is eager to produce East Africa's first antivenom. The center, which is funded by the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, says it expects the antivenom to be on the market within 5 years. Its production cost is estimated to be about a third of an imported product, often priced at about $100.
No one has produced any kind of antivenom in Kenya, and we have 2 registered antivenom which are being used in different hospitals in Kenya. The first one comes from India, which is Vins, and the second one is Inosap from Mexico.
The team at KSRIC extracts venom and studies it before injecting small amounts into donor animals, such as sheep, which then produce antibodies to be harvested and purified into antivenom. The center says there are 2 effective antivenoms available in Kenya from India and Mexico. Wilkista Nyabwa, CGTN.
Well, so that anti-venom isn't going to be ready for anywhere up to 5 years. What happens now? What kind of accessibility do Kenyans have to anti-venom?
Well, the situation as it stands is that we did mention earlier that the antivenom isn't easy to come by, but it is there in small quantities, especially in hospitals and health facilities, in urban centers. In remote areas, it's a little bit harder to find, and even when you find it in these urban centers and in these medical facilities, it doesn't come cheap. A vial could go for as much as $100, and that is why it is really important to have the antivenom that is being developed, because it would cost about a third, which would make it accessible to families, even those with lower incomes. But at this point, really, it's just a few facilities that are able to access it, and most of these are in the urban centers. So, and families have to dig deeper into their pockets in order to get antivenom, and in case they cannot find it, then some of them do lose their lives, or it does affect the quality of their lives. So this is really a turning point. It could be a potential turning point for many, many people.
Okay, it will save many lives, so accessibility and affordability there. Okay, thank you very much for coming in, Wilkista Nyapwa.
Thank you,
there.
Karen.
Moving on to other news now. News in brief. Let's now shift to the Mediterranean, where German NGO CI has released a video showing a man firing shots in the air as migrants were rescued. The speedboat was flying a Libyan flag. The man in the video is shown standing behind a tripod-mounted automatic rifle. Some migrants were put on board the speedboat, while others jumped overboard their dinghy and swam towards CI's boat. The German NGO estimates that they rescued 90 people. In Iraq, at least 72 people have been killed in the latest round of protests there. The United Nations Office on Human Rights has called for an investigation into the deaths. It also urged security forces to practice restraint. After the first wave of protests in early October, which killed 149 people, the UN Assistance Mission for Iraq published a report showing the use of excessive force by security forces. An Iraqi government committee also published a report showing evidence of excessive force. Now let's go to Lebanon, where Prime Minister Saad Hariri has announced that he will resign after nearly 2 weeks of protests. He spoke in a televised address on Tuesday, saying his resignation is in response to protesters' demands and to show his commitment to protecting his country. Fights broke out between rival groups of protesters in the capital Beirut on Tuesday. Supporters of Shiite groups Hezbollah and Amal clashed with demonstrators, pulling down their tents, forcing police to step in. Ongoing protests have shut down parts of the capital. Crowds have set up barricades, blocking main roads, demanding government leaders step down.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The UK Parliament has been debating Prime Minister Boris Johnson's request for an election on the 12th of December. This after Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn said he would support it. CGTN's Richard Bestick is live for us in London. Richard, what's the latest you have there?
Karen, inside Parliament, battle has commenced for what will be a December general election. In the cold and dark days of December, all the main parties now are agreed that the country should be allowed to have its say again, not in a referendum, but in a general election on Brexit. It is a high-risk game. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, could find himself the third British Prime Minister to be forced out of office by Brexit. He has, as you'll remember, promised to be dead in a ditch rather than not get Brexit done by October the 31st. Well, that dead in a ditch promise is now as dead as a dodo. There is no prospect of the country leaving the European Union by the end of October, Halloween. Instead, for the fourth time, Boris Johnson has come back to Parliament. The difference this time, he failed every other time to get an election. The difference this time is that the Scottish Nationalists, the opposition party, the Liberal Democrats, have joined forces and effectively bounced the main opposition party, the Labour Party, into agreeing to a general election. The only thing they haven't decided is the date. But as you'll hear from the two leaders in Parliament earlier, in full general election mode. Have a listen.
We are left with no choice but to go to the country to break free from this impasse and to allow us all to submit, as we must, in all humility, to the judgment of the electorate, and to allow us to make our case, and above all, to allow a new and revitalised Parliament with a new mandate to deliver on the will of the people and get Brexit done. And there is only one way to get Brexit done: in the face of this unrelenting parliamentary obstructionism, this endless, willful, fingers crossed, not me gov refusal to deliver on the mandate of the people, and that is, Mr. Speaker, to refresh this Parliament and give the people a choice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour backs a general election because we want this country to be rid of this reckless and destructive Conservative government. A government that has caused more of our children to be living in poverty, more pensioners to be in poverty, and more people to be in work poverty. More families without a home to call their own, and more people sleeping rough on our streets. A government that has cut and sold off so much of our important public services. No, I won't give way. That government which created the vicious, hostile environment which saw our own citizens deported from this country. It is time for real change. And I've said consistently, when no deal is off the table, we will back an election. Today, after much denial and much bluster by the Prime Minister, that deal is officially off the table. So this country can vote for the government that it deserves.
So, Richard, what happens after the vote?
Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn.
Oh dear, I think we have lost Richard Bestick there. We are going to go to a short break now. Don't go away, lots more to come. Including World Health Organization raises the alarm as 5 million people die annually from strokes. And Egypt's famous Tahrir Square getting a massive makeover to turn it into a tourist magnet.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Let's now go to Cairo in Egypt and see what's happening in Tahrir Square. Adel El Mahrouhi is there for us. Adel, tell us what's going on.
Well, at least 5 government entities have joined hands for a massive renovation project in the heart of Cairo. The iconic Tahrir Square is getting a facelift, and the government wants to make it a hub, a cultural and touristic hub in the capital. Now, that square for more than a century has hosted hundreds of thousands of Egyptians who rallied calling for freedom and calling for a better life since 1919. A long history there. And with the coming over of that square and the renovations is going to be a big shift in the history of that square. I've been to the square this morning for a tour, so here is what is going to happen exactly and how will it affect that great place. If you've been to Cairo, you've seen its features, the tower, the opera house, and these fearless creatures, the lines of Qasr al-Nil Bridge. Since 1931, these creatures have been standing as the gateway to Tahrir Square. This magical view explains why the government wants Tahrir area to become a touristic hub. Already it hosts many hotels, including 5 five-star hotels. They surround the most famous touristic attraction in the downtown area, the Egyptian Museum.
Renovating Tahrir Square aims to emphasize on the cultural heritage of the entire downtown area. The project has been set to begin once the government offices in the area move to the new administrative capital. The center of Tahrir Square will host a pharaonic obelisk.
The renovations have begun. The iconic flagpole that used to stand here since the 2013 June 30th uprising has been demolished. Instead of it, at the center of Tahrir Square will stand an iconic ancient Egyptian obelisk. This colossal building is the Tahrir Complex, the biggest public service facility in the capital. Departments inside have been gradually relocating. Behind it, the Egyptian Parliament, the Prime Ministry, the Elections Authority headquarters, and more ministries. All of them will be moving away from the Tahrir area within the next few years. It's a comprehensive makeover for Tahrir Square. Banners blocking the facades of its distinctive buildings will be removed. This unique place leads to all major squares in Cairo, and under it is one of the biggest metro stations in the country. And as it hosts 2 diplomatic buildings, the headquarters of the Arab League and the Foreign Ministry's reception palace, all of this has given this place a unique political significance.
Its political significance does not only apply to the 2011 January Revolution. It goes all the way to the 1919 revolution. Back then, it was named Ismailia Square. Since then, it has been nicknamed Tahrir Square. Then the name officially changed after the 1952 revolution when Egypt was liberated from the monarchy rule.
In recent memory, 3 major demonstrations took place here in Tahrir Square. I was a student here at the American University in Cairo when the first one broke. Scores of Egyptians and Arab expats came here to stand against the US-led invasion to Iraq in 2003. And years later, the famous and unforgettable 2011 January uprising. For 18 days, scores camped here in Tahrir Square until former President Hosni Mubarak stepped down. And 2 years later, more people came to Tahrir Square, this time giving the green light for President Mohamed Morsi's ouster. Tahrir in Arabic means liberation. And when this place becomes the touristic hub it is designated to be, stories of Egyptians aspiring freedom and change will live forever. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, from the famous Tahrir Square.
As the world marks World Stroke Day, there's growing concern amongst health experts that strokes have reached epidemic proportions. The World Health Organization says about 15 million people suffer from a stroke each year, resulting in the deaths of about 5 million people and leaving a similar number permanently disabled. CGTN's Robert Nagila has more.
A stroke is a condition where blood supply to the brains is disrupted, resulting in oxygen starvation, brain damage and loss of function. It can cause permanent damage, including partial paralysis, speech impairment, comprehension and memory loss. According to the World Health Organization, stroke has already reached epidemic proportions. About 15 million people suffer strokes worldwide each year. Of this number, about 5 million people die each year and another 5 million are permanently disabled. About 80 million people living in the world today have experienced a stroke at some point in their lives. Over 50 million survivors live with some form of permanent disability. As a result, 17.9 million people die each year from cardiovascular diseases, an estimated 31% of all deaths. 85% of all CVD deaths are due to heart attacks and strokes, while 75% of CVD deaths occur in low-income and middle-income countries. In developed countries, the incidence of stroke are declining largely due to efforts to lower blood pressure and reduce smoking. However, the overall rate of stroke remains high due to the aging of the population. Back to you.
Well, Nigeria is one of the sub-Saharan countries dealing with the burden of treating stroke victims. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam looks further into the issue.
A team of experts giving care to a patient dealing with stroke at this medical facility in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. The fatal illness constitutes about 15% of medical admissions in hospitals across the country. When a blood vessel carrying oxygen and nutrients to the brain is either ruptured or blocked by a clot, that eventually leads to a stroke. And if not properly managed, the aftermath is mortality or irreversible disabilities in survivors.
The response of the medical practitioner to the patient that has stroke now determines how the person comes out of that cardiovascular accident. Then finances, investigations, because if you're going to, ideally if a patient with stroke comes, you're supposed to do a CT scan, which will determine what type of stroke this patient has. So determining the type of stroke would also help in your management of this patient and then what you do for that patient.
There are few public health facilities with needed equipment for immediate diagnosis, so experts sometimes rely on clinical judgments to commence treatment. The implications of stroke are multidimensional, affecting the victim's well-being and the family as well. Experts advise that healthy lifestyle changes and routine checks could avert a crisis.
The best thing is prevention. And world over, people are talking of preventive medicine. And then how can you are looking at the risk factors, things that predispose people to developing stroke. And what are these risk factors? They are mainly cardiovascular events. Hypertension, diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, some of these things. So it means each one of us would need to screen ourselves.
Less than 4% of Nigeria's 2018 budget went to health. That's far below the WHO recommendation that 5% of the country's GDP should be invested in the sector. With nearly half of Nigeria's 200 million population extremely poor, health conditions like stroke would remain a high cause of mortality in the country. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's take a look now at South Africa, where cardiovascular disease remains the leading cause of death in the country, with around 215 people dying every day from heart disease or strokes. This public health issue is beginning to place considerable strain on the health system. CGTN's Travis Andrews has this report.
In South Africa, strokes are responsible for some 25,000 deaths per year, which has placed the country's mortality rate in the medium to high risk category amongst the global mean. 80% of heart diseases and strokes, though, can be prevented, and it starts with getting tested for the disease. A quick prick can potentially save a life. Free testing stations is one measure that organizations such as the Heart and Stroke Foundation undertake to mitigate against the disease burden, which is alarmingly high.
So in South Africa, we're actually seeing that people are suffering 10 strokes every hour. So that means 240 strokes a day. Now, stroke is actually the #2 killer of women in South Africa and the 6th killer of men in South Africa. And it amounts to 5% of all deaths in South Africa. Now, there are many risk factors for stroke.
There are many risk factors to becoming a victim to strokes, including unhealthy eating, being overweight, and tobacco smoking. A family history of the disease also makes one highly susceptible. To promote healthy living and stroke awareness, the public and private sector partner to offer cholesterol, blood glucose, and blood pressure testing, which is critical to mitigate against the burden being placed on the public health system.
50% of strokes lead to disability, and those people are left with lifelong disabilities a lot of the time. So that means that it has an impact on the workforce, where those individuals cannot work anymore. That has an impact on the economy. And then, of course, they have medical expenses that the government has to subsidize.
School kids also being taught to look out for common signs associated with strokes, including paralysis to the face and limbs. Poverty remains a serious issue in South Africa, and that means not all sufferers have access to quality nutritional foods, which makes the free testing rollout critical to those who are most at risk to the disease and its debilitating after effects in middle to low income households.
It was a simple process, very good, very informative, by knowing what your health is like and what your blood pressure and cholesterol and those kind of things entail. So it's a very good experience to be here.
There's broad consensus that cardiovascular disease and stroke in particular are a serious public health issue that requires attention in homes, schools, and in important conversations. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Well, let's now go to Ucha for all the latest business news. Over to you.
Thank you, Karen. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Unemployment rates rise to the highest levels in South Africa. And Kenya announces plans to cut its commercial borrowing.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start off in South Africa. The country's unemployment rate has hit its highest level in 11 years. Latest data from Stats SA shows that the number of people without jobs increased to 29.1% in the third quarter of the year. Now, South Africa's working age population now stands at about 38.6 million people. However, around 6 million are without jobs. Now, in the third quarter alone, 72,000 more people were unemployed compared to 62,000 who have found jobs. Youth remain the most vulnerable in the labor force, and more than half of them are still unable to find work. This, of course, contrasts with just about 9.9% of those nearing retirement. That's between 55 to 64, who, of course, are still unemployed. And moving on now, Russia and Uganda have agreed to work together in the field of nuclear energy. The deal comes as Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni seeks to use his country's uranium deposits to develop nuclear power. Now, this is also part of Moscow's strategy to strengthen their influence in Africa. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke with more.
the Russian state corporation Rosatom will support Uganda in the construction of nuclear power plants and the Center for Nuclear Science and Technology. The nuclear plants will also have facilities for production of chemical elements needed for cancer management.
The nuclear energy that we will want is not for making weapons, but specifically for generating electricity and energy for our industries and for research in medicine.
During the recent Russia-Africa summit in Sochi, the Russian President Vladimir Putin offered African countries an opportunity to use nuclear technology, and Uganda also wants to use this relationship as an opportunity to trade with Russia.
We hope that Russia will open up its market for African products. Russia will open its market for for industries, Russian industries to invest in Uganda and in Africa. So this is a great opportunity not only for Uganda but for Africa.
Rwanda and Egypt have also signed nuclear deals with Russia. In May last year, Uganda signed a similar deal with China to help the country exploit its uranium deposits for potential nuclear energy development. Michael Balekesi, GTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, Kenya has announced plans to cut back borrowing on the capital market over the next 3 years. This is as the East African economy looks to ease its current debt burden. Kenya's debt has risen to about 55% of GDP from a previous 42%. Since taking office in 2013, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta's administration has been criticized for ramping up borrowing. Now, the Treasury has already announced plans to review its 2019 and 2020 budget by cutting its expenditure. The Finance Ministry says it will focus more on revenue collection by setting realistic tax targets. Most of the loans are channeled to infrastructure projects, and the projects fall under the President's Development Program, also known as the Big Four Agenda. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, there's been a steady decrease in the price of cooking gas, with nearly 2.5% of a price fall. Cooking gas is turning out to be a better alternative for more households as well as food businesses. Now, the drop is also increasing demand across the West African economy, as CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam now explains.
Judith Kwesi earns a living from her small cooking business in the Garki market in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. She started out using kerosene stoves, and just months back, she changed to using gas. The crash in the price of cooking gas presents an opportunity for many like Judith to save some extra cash.
That's 6 kg and married by 2.5.
Before, I used to refill my 6-kilogram cylinder at 2,500 naira. However, now it's being sold at 1,500 naira. There's a huge difference. Now I can save the extra 1,000 naira or use it to buy other ingredients for my business.
I will buy it 1.5, then save that 1,000 naira.
The consumption ratio for cooking gas in the country has continued to rise, with a record 600% in the last 2 years. While the price drop may seem insignificant, consumers are excited. The government's earlier removal of the 5% VAT from domestic pricing also contributed to the price fall. Among other advantages, this trend has created a boom in the sector.
Why people are using gas now is that
more people are using gas for their cooking now because, as you can see, we have 12.5, 6 and 5 kilogram cylinders respectively. The prices vary from size to size. The different sizes of gas cylinders makes it more economical for people, as they can always buy what their money can afford. My expectation is for the price to drop further so that more people can frequent my business.
Nigeria currently consumes about 600,000 metric tons, which is over 10% of a country's actual capacity. The goal, however, is to achieve 5 million metric tons utilization in the next 10 years, and that could be achieved with a continuous price drop. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, Kenya's telecom giant Safaricom has set its eyes on venturing into Ethiopia's fast-growing mobile market. Ethiopia, of course, announced plans to open its telecoms market to foreign investment for the first time in history. The country said it will be issuing 2 operating permits in April next year. Interested firms have up to November 22nd this year to submit their bids. Now, Safaricom, like a number of global telecom firms, has expressed interest in the lucrative deal. According to the telco's interim CEO, consultations on the bidding process are already underway. Safaricom is looking to either buy a stake in state-owned Ethio Telecom or set up shop in the country from scratch. Now, South Africa has signed a tourism partnership with Chinese gaming giant Tencent. The collaboration will span over 2 years, and it aims to position South Africa as one of Chinese travelers' preferred tourism destinations through digital marketing campaigns. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu with the details.
It's a 2-year deal in which South Africa is hoping to draw thousands of new Chinese tourists to the country.
What would basically happen is that over the next 2 years, the WeChat or Tencent will look into their existing applications and customize them to what the South African tourism or what we're actually asking them to do. And throughout that, they'll be able to customize apps, generate special QR codes, be able to give us algorithms about what the previous visitors did when they're in South Africa. I mean, what did they eat, how much did they spend? So it gives us the soft intelligence to be able to understand.
Almost 100,000 Chinese visited South Africa in 2018. The Department of Tourism is hoping to double that figure in the next 2 years.
I think the partnership is great, and I think that it's long overdue that we partner with such prestigious companies, especially in the Chinese market, where we want to see, large volumes in terms of tourist arrivals in South Africa. We expect that market to grow, by large numbers, between now and 2030. And we hope that, we see a whole lot more Chinese, traveler, visiting our shores and enjoying this beautiful country.
We can leverage this by using the infrastructure of those firms that we have relationships with to advertise South Africa, and also, I think, moreover, to try and get a more flow of economic goods and services going, so that we don't only export ore and coal and stuff to China, and that we don't only import Chinese goods, we also participate in Chinese tourism. We also tour the Chinese mainland, and that strengthens the relationship between the two countries.
In 2014, China was South Africa's 4th largest market for inbound tourism. Today, China tops the list, followed by the US, UK and Germany. South Africa is pushing hard to attract more tourists. The president set a goal to double tourism numbers from 10 million to 21 million in 2030. The Department of Home Affairs has also scrapped requirements for unabridged birth certificates for children living outside of South Africa. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, several companies from Rwanda have confirmed a participation at this year's China International Import Expo, which will take place in Shanghai. Rwandan products to be exhibited at the fair range from coffee to handcrafts. The companies view the event as a golden opportunity to showcase exports to the Chinese market. More than 3,600 enterprises participated in the first CIIE, which was held last November. This year, Rwandan firms are targeting to seal export deals with major trade partners such as Alibaba and other importers.
So this is a very interesting initiative. Not only it's contributing to the Chinese economy, but it's contributing to the global economy in general by increasing sales. And when you are increasing sales, what does it mean? It means you are creating jobs in other countries, therefore you are reducing the poverty in other countries, and at the end you are also contributing to the achievement of the SDGs, the Millennium Goals somehow. So all these combined really are contributing to the global development.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but ahead on Global Business Africa, U.S. investment bank Goldman Sachs led a financing round in Kenya's food distribution startup Twiga Foods. We'll have the details on that deal coming up, of course, after this. Back to you, Ken.
Thank you very much, Ucha. Well, we are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including the biggest literary festival wraps up in Lagos in Nigeria.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's now turn to Morocco, where the University of Hassan II is fostering African-Chinese knowledge transfer. An opening ceremony for a pavilion gave a sneak peek of the books on a wide array of Chinese topics available for students.
The Chinese Pavilion stands proud on the third floor of the University of Hassan II in Casablanca, Morocco. The project was a collaboration between the university and China's State Council of Information Office. Visitors will get to access books ranging from Chinese economics to sociology and so many more.
This is part of a long-term plan to create fruitful ties between universities here and elsewhere. Here in Morocco, the university is focusing on institutes and services China.
At the pavilion's opening ceremony, students got a chance to experience the available amenities.
Now we have a library which allows us to learn about Chinese culture. Before, when we had to research about China, we couldn't find books.
I've browsed some of the books just now and found them very interesting. I will come again to read them.
The pavilion will also host a week-long photo exhibit commemorating the PRC's developments over the past 70 years. Astatar, CGTN.
The biggest literary festival has just wrapped up in Lagos in Nigeria, with thousands of guests having flown in from all over the country. The Ake Arts and Book Festival featured book reading and signing, reviews, panel discussions and fun activities. CGTN's Deji Badmus brings us highlights from the festival.
Over 3,000 participants, among them top-rated guest authors, award-winning filmmakers and art enthusiasts from different parts of Nigeria and the diaspora attended the event, considered one of the biggest art and book festivals on the continent. For 4 whole days, there were panel sessions like this, where the 115 guest authors had the opportunity to review some of their works, hold conversations on their African identity, and tell stories in celebration of African art and literature. Organizers of the Ake Arts and Book Festival came up with the initiative as a means of reviving a dying literary culture on the continent.
The idea was to create a safe space where creatives from Africa and the African diaspora, but also, Africans or people of African descent living in the US, in the Caribbean, in South America, finding a space, creating a space for them to be able to come together, to network, to support, to develop, to celebrate and to promote creativity on the African continent.
As expected, there were so many books on display, but this event was not just about books. Several films were also screened, including one by this New York-based Nigerian filmmaker and actress.
Well, I was invited to speak on a panel and to show my short film, To Be Free. I was here for the very first Ake in Abeokuta, and they screened a film that I was in called Pariah. And so it's just happy to be back home under these circumstances, surrounded by amazing creatives.
This is the 6th edition of the festival. Previous editions had been sponsored by foreign organizations. This is the very first time an indigenous African company would be funding it. And that means a lot for the organizers.
It was all about where can we tap into foreign money, where can we get money that's international, and it gives me so much pride that we're now at a stage where we don't have to do that. This festival is an African festival. The bulk of the money that we're spending is from Sterling Bank. and I'm really, really proud of that.
Art enthusiasts say there is a greater appreciation for African art and literature than ever before, and give kudos to Ake for giving it the global recognition it deserves. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
All the sports news coming up for you after the break, including South African Kirsten Landman set to become the first African female rider to take part in the Dakar Rally.